Welcome back to Suzette's Guilty Pleasures. Today we are going to be talking about mental health, which seems to be a big trend during this pandemic, if that's what you want to call it. But I have two great hosts, or actually great guest speakers, sorry, joining us today that is going to talk about mental health. Before we get started, I do want to introduce them to you. We have Michelle Nicholls, who is a registered social worker, psychotherapist whose practice is grounded in anti-oppression and anti-racist approaches. Michelle is a mindfulness meditation facilitator who co-leads True North Insights, BIPOC Sangha, and provides workshops for organizations seeking to build community support through mindfulness. She has worked in community health centers for over 14 years, working with diverse community members with various social and mental health challenges. She currently works in private practice, focusing on delivering services to BIPOC individuals and groups. Thank you Michelle, for so much for joining us. Next, we have Lindsay. Lindsay Williams, she, her, is an activist and therapist that works in the public health sector, as well as operates an independent therapy practice called Lighthouse Therapy, which you can connect with her at lighthousetherapy.ca. Lindsay also has completed a Master's of Social Work from Ryerson University and has been a therapist in public health and private practice for 18 years. She cites her relationships, experiences, and education in anti-oppressive, anti-racist, and decolonizing frameworks as the foundation of her therapeutic values, ethics, and approaches to understanding and connecting with others. With nearly 2 decades doing passionate harm reduction activism, she continues her commitment to advocacy for accessible counseling services. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for joining us. We have two amazing women, as you can see right here, very knowledgeable and has a great wealth of knowledge in regards to mental health. So we should be having a great conversation today. Hello, ladies.
Thanks, Susie.
Hi, Susie.
So let's start off first of all. What made you guys get into counseling?
Anyone can go.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me start then. So I guess I'll start from the community health center days, because prior to that, yes, I knew I wanted to be a social worker. And that looked maybe a little bit different. But once I was in the community healthcare setting, then that meant I was doing like a lot of counseling. So part of it was just seeing the need and connecting with people in a really kind of like, I don't know, the word is right, but wholesome way, like the ability to form relationships with people and to share and be open. And the fact that people trusted me with their stories, that was actually quite inspiring. So I always say that I learn so much from the people I work with. And heading into private practice, I'd spent like a number of years in community health and realized at some point, and I can tell you the exact point where I needed to go. And that was actually with the Black Lives Matter revolution, the death of Regis, who actually lived in the community I served, and feeling like the center's response was no response. Mm-hmm. And as the only like Black frontline worker left, it really felt violent. It just felt like being completely abandoned and not being able to support the community well. Sure. So having said all that, being able to do practice on my own, I was able to, especially in that beginning time, like focus on serving Black and people of color, Indigenous people in my practice. And that was really important to me.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Thank you. What about you, Lindsay?
I came into this work a long while ago, and I started kind of in a more like activist way, organizing like Take Back the Night marches and responses for a rape crisis center I worked for at the time. And then I just really felt comfortable working in that collective and a feminist approach to understanding the violence that women are experiencing. And so I started integrating my activism and my counseling practices and really not seeing them as separate things, and really trying to collaborate with women and do activism and counseling work together.
For sure.
And so I've taken that in every place I've worked for, and every sector I've worked in. I feel like I've tried to embody the same practice, no matter where I was working.
Mhm.
And, at this point, I feel like I'm really trying to respond to several crises that are happening in our world and in our city. And for us, me in Toronto as a harm reduction outreach worker, of course, to the opioid crisis and the pandemic, and the lack of response around like anti-Black racism and violence, and just the lack of response. And so I feel like, part of wanting to move into more independent work is also similar to what Michelle had said, was like wanting to be able to practice the way that I hope to practice and continue to bring social justice work into individual conversations.
Right.
It feels like really important to me.
For sure, for sure. So before you guys started your own practice, how would you say that the pandemic and with all the Black Lives Matter and things that had happened throughout the beginning of the pandemic of last year, how has that sort of changed your practice? How has that sort of changed even the clientele that you are now starting to get?
Mm-hmm. So I know for me, Susie and I talked a little bit earlier, but I never had any intention of going virtual. It was like going to be in person, and I knew who my client focus was. But when I realized there were people waiting to be seen and wanted to be seen virtually, that really opened up a whole new world for me.
Mhm.
And I would say that even doing a consultation to hear a bit about like what people were seeking, like if we might be a good fit working together, so many people were deeply impacted by the Black Lives Matter movement, how things were impacting them at work and their jobs, like perhaps similarly being like, I'm the only Black person there. I can't take any more of this, like teaching people how they should be with me or how should they be with other Black folk. And I even had white people reach out to me similarly because they said, well, a lot of my friends think like this and I can't deal with them anymore. Or my partner is Black, or my partner is a person of color, and I want to be able to have a conversation and discuss some of my traumas and stuff with a person who understands my experience being with a person of color as well. So having said all that, I don't know if I answered the question fully, but I would say that it was definitely at the height or really at the forefront of people's experience coming to therapy. So people who've never been to therapy before really felt like they needed to talk about the things that were coming up for them, the traumas, the past traumas,
For sure.
microaggressions, everything. Mm-hmm.
For sure. For sure. Lindsay?
Yeah, similarly, people wanting us like to find a safe space to talk about the experiences that are happening at home, at work, and in community. And because of the pandemic, so many things being virtual, even the violence and injury and assaults that are caused through reading the comments or the sections, the comment section, and just really hurtful and horrific statements and actions that people are having, or videos that were being forwarded, and just even the trauma of like scrolling through Instagram and witnessing things that you're totally unprepared for, don't see coming. It's so horrific. And so people wanting to connect with someone that they felt safe and comfortable with, to be able to talk about like, what are the effects of this daily racism that I'm experiencing? And also now all of this, I like, there's no respite from it. It's like seeped into every facet of my life.
Yes.
And also like as a white woman, having other white women and people come to me saying, okay, I need to show up differently for people. I need to start responding in a different way. I need to hold myself accountable. And like, can you hold me accountable? And can we do some learning together? What do you recommend? Can we have conversation? And just feeling like I don't want to give the responsibility of a Black or person of color to like be teaching me what I'm doing wrong here. Like I want to be able to say to you exactly what I'm thinking and have you kind of like help me through that. And so I've done a lot of co-learning with people, and just kind of like little book clubs and stuff, and courses, and just sharing content and having conversation that needs to be had. And yeah, I think that's been an important thing. And similar to Michelle, I mean, I never expected to be virtual either.
Right.
So figuring out that and those dynamics is not my preferred way of connecting, but certainly in this climate, I'm happy we have that over nothing, because there's so much need for connection, that it's great to be able to do that for people who have access to internet or a phone or a computer or something, right?
For
And
sure.
also just creating like accessible counseling services is really important, because for a lot of people who need the care but don't have access, it's
Right.
like, you know, so I think affordable fees is really important to me. And also knowing, because I'm a community worker, I also know like all the cover resources somewhere up here. So to be able to refer out also feels good.
Right. And I feel that, pre-pandemic, everyone was so busy with their lives, right? That nobody was really taking on certain things that was happening in the world or even in our community, because if we did, it was whatever we heard on the news. So whatever the news wanted to portray or tell us, whether it was the right information or not, that was the only way that we would know. But as you guys both said, since the pandemic and having more access to social media now, because that's what everybody's on right now, right?
Mhm.
We're almost like always becoming secondary trauma for us,
Mhm.
seeing everything that we continue to see that's being thrown in our face. And it's like, you're right. How do we cope? How do we manage? How do we work on us and make sure that we're okay? Because we know that how we are also affects everybody else around us, right? And you're right, even with because I know for me, even with the whole George Floyd thing, and when this whole Black Lives Matter started, I know even within my organization, there was a few white colleagues that was always like, oh, we want to be able to help, but like, how can we help? What do we need to do? And it got back to that where it's like, why do we have to always be teaching you guys? Like,
It's
you guys
tiring.
like understand and try to figure it out. Do your own research. You try to figure out, why do we? And that's just another layer that's added on top for us, right? Because it's like
Mhm.
we have to re-traumatize ourselves to be able to teach you of what we've gone through, and that's not fair. So
Exactly.
definitely. Would you throughout the pandemic, would you say that, like, what would you say was the most, I guess, mental health concern? Like, I know there's a whole range of mental health. I know that, in January we have a specific mental health day, Bell Let's Talk Day and stuff like that. But and now I think there is a little bit more conversation when it comes to mental health. But what would you say is the more prime, if that's what you want to call it,
Mhm.
mental health that your clients seem to be seeking from you?
Mhm. For me, a lot of clients are saying it's anxiety. I have a lot of anxiety. I don't know how to cope with my anxiety, and depression.
Mhm.
And as we work together, what I understand is that they also have a lot of trauma,
Mm,
right? So really just not addressed at all. No language to even identify that's what it is. So it's
mhm,
been really interesting working with folks who never never thought that they were traumatized. And then like learning about like their history, their childhood history, this incident, that incident, and then having a way to frame that and to work through that, developing new coping skills to identify even things like with family members that are continue
yeah,
to be stressors, like major stressors and things like that. So identifying different ways at how they can cope through the pandemic while working and having these traumas. The other thing that really strikes me is that for my clients that are working, many of them have had this like awakening where they realize like their jobs do not align with their values.
mhm,
It's so interesting to me that they're at home and maybe because they're not in the office anymore, and like the office creates a culture, right?
yes,
So Sometimes that culture is supportive. It seems supportive if you've got a lot of nice, shiny things during lunchtime or after work and things like that.
Right.
Now being at home, that's stripped away. So there's almost like this idea that management expects you to work not just like the way we were working before, but even more.
Yes.
Or even faster, even better. Like they
Yes.
seem to think like there's no other external things that may impact that person's daily life. Meanwhile, you're at home. So you are like, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're doing groceries, you're putting away groceries delivered during a meeting, things like that, if you have access to those things. And then again, you're still working through those traumas and being on the screen all day. So I think those few things. So a lot of dealing with workplace stuff, this idea of imposter syndrome, which I would say impacts mostly clients who are Black and people of color, like feeling like, I don't know how I got here, or I feel not worthy, or I need to prove myself over and over, therefore I will work till midnight. So a lot of that is happening, which of course you cannot sustain like a proper healthy mental health practices if you're working till midnight. Like, how do you do that? You're never away from work.
For sure. I actually have to agree with you on that. I feel like since we've been in the office, they feel like out of the office, it almost feels like there's a lot more pressure and expectations on you, because sometimes I feel they think that we're at home because we're at home doing nothing. We're at home doing our own thing and whatever, not realizing like I'm actually working. I'm taking my breaks. Like, I'll be honest with you, and I hope nobody from work is watching. But I actually worked less at work in the office than I actually do at home. You know what I'm saying? So to me, it's like, and then they put these expectations on you and expecting like, this needs to be done. And it's like, yeah, I know. Like, I've been doing this job for like how long? I know nothing has changed except the fact that I'm not in the office. Relax, bring it down. And you're right. It's when we start to now feel like I need to prove, right? I need to make sure they know that I'm working. I need to make sure that they know I'm not sitting here like slacking, because as bad as this may sound, I'm sure they think that us Black workers are at home doing nothing, or we're just taking our time and, just slacking kind of thing. So I agree with you, Nichelle, about the whole, like, we have to be able to learn how to balance that work-life balance, right? And having those kind of conversations, if you can, even with like your superior and things like that. And, being able to talk up more when we're having our town hall meetings to say like, how we feel, right? Because there are times where we don't talk how we feel because one, we don't want to be blacklisted. And then two, we don't want them to look at us, be like, are you weak? Are you can't do the job? Because you get that too. Right. So for sure, I do feel that that's the difference. Yeah. Did you want to say anything about that, Lindsay? I forgot my question.
No, I mean, I think, the folks I'm seeing are bringing up several of the same things Michelle mentioned. And also just, I was thinking about the anxiety around like the lack of certainty and like really forward thinking and planning, and not being able to know the very forward thinking and planning. And I think people's recognizing like that usually life moves so fast and it's so busy that now when there's like more stillness, that people are recognizing like a real deep uncomfortability in the stillness. So the stillness itself becomes something to fear of.
Yes.
It's like, I need to be more busy. I need to be more occupied because sitting in the stillness is really hard for me. And I think that that's something people are learning of themselves. And that's been really hard. And also like, I was thinking just as you were speaking, Susie, like the safety of having a workspace. And now, because the work and home space is the same space, you don't get to separate yourself in the same way. So let's say, like for some folks I'm working with, like the value of being able to show this part of myself at work, but be who I am in my personal life and in my home is something different, and important for me to have those boundaries and that guard to protect myself, because I know I'm up against homophobia, transphobia, racism, etc., whatever's happening.
Sure.
But now when you have your work people in your home, in your kitchen or wherever your space is, you don't have that same boundary, which makes us more vulnerable and feel more vulnerable and feel like, well, how do I actually turn off when it's all happening in the same space?
For sure. I like that. I like
Yeah.
that. It's
So
true.
I think that's a real issue, like just that actually that is a physical feeling, that like that lack of safety. Like I don't have a
Absolutely.
separation, and now these people that I'm not safe with in my work life are in my personal home.
Right.
Mhm.
No, for sure. Do
Yeah.
you within your practices, um, your clients, now I know that like Kids Help Phone had talked about the fact that suicide attempts are have risen since the pandemic. Um, do you have children in your practices, or whether or not it's in your practice or not, but have you worked with children even like during this pandemic of who's been having, whether it's suicidal thoughts or just going through depression or even anxiety? Because I know pre-pandemic, some of the clients that I worked with, a lot of kids suffered from, and they were young, from depression
Mhm.
and anxiety, right? But how have you seen a lot more of that within your practice since the pandemic? And if so, like, what are some of the ways that we can help my listeners to be able to help those that kids that they may know or may have that are going through that?
Mhm. I don't see a lot of children in my practice, but I do see a few teenagers. The youngest person I see is 13.
Okay.
So it's interesting because actually, of the young people I'm seeing, they have felt like they've been okay through the pandemic. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, some of the things that have caused them stress is this, like school anxiety,
Yes.
right? So especially in the transition, like let's say from grade 8 to grade 9, like that's a big transition. There's a
For sure.
lot of things to be fearful of going into grade 9, but mostly it's just things around interaction with family members that is causing them some stress.
Okay.
Um, of my young clients that maybe are still considered youth but not children, there have been a few clients that have been suicidal at times.
Okay.
um, how we've worked through that is really, in private practice, it's not, I wouldn't say it's typical. Maybe Lindsay and I might have this in common coming from community. It's not typical for someone to say, okay, just book an appointment with me, don't pay for it because I know you're going through something right now and you just saw me last week and I don't expect you to pay again like this week, right? So I might do that. I said, if you're feeling like really low, just like hit me up in the messaging system, book an appointment. We won't charge you, like we'll
Right.
just see you and we'll sort out like what your plan is, right? Like how you might get some support, extra support during this time, like what it is you need. And that actually has helped, right? Where they know like, oh, okay, like I don't have to worry about bothering you
Exactly.
or I don't have the money to pay for another session within the next week. So
Right.
I just make it be known like this is a community and I want to take care of the community. I'm not here to like rip money out of your hands during a crisis,
Yeah,
basically, right? So
for sure.
mhm.
For sure.
Yeah, so it is also offering them other support, so like phone numbers. I know, and even my email, if someone emails me, there's a whole like long list of different numbers to call, different
Right.
free supports in a crisis that people know that they can access if they need it, and it's late and they can't access me.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's funny, I guess we don't give kids really that much credit then, right? Because they're actually a bit more resilient than we are. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I've been surprised because it's sometimes my assumption, oh wow, this must be hard for you. They're like, actually, I feel like I'm thriving in the pandemic. It's really my relationship with my mom that I'm
Yeah.
having a
Right.
hard time with, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's the thing, because to me, I'm always like the changes, especially with the inconsistency with school, then the
Mhm.
inconsistency with lockdowns. And to me, I'm always like, because I feel like this, I'm just like, I can only imagine how you're feeling.
Mhm.
So young, you're not an adult like me who's gone through so much. And you know what I mean? But we don't give them credit, clearly.
Mhm.
You're not seeing them as often, right? So
Yeah.
that's amazing to hear. Do you think that how do you think that social media portrays mental health? Is it accurate? Is it falsified? Is it glamorized? Like, what would you say about that? You want to
Lindsay, do you want to go?
Oh, sure. Um, yeah. I sorry. I'll just take a deep breath before answering. I feel like, there can be a lot of messages that are not as helpful as maybe they intend to be.
go?
And the onus comes really back on the individual person,
Okay.
which feels kind of like unfair to me. I think that, you know, the way we care for ourselves is to care for each other and to like do this experience together. I think like a lot of what I'm seeing is like a collective grief and a collective like difficulty, like interpersonal relationships, like Michelle was saying, with even with kids and their parents, right? And a lot of kids even saying like, I'm just really worried about my parents.
Mhm.
So I think, you know, it's this experience through the media of it can also often feel like, you know, you need to do this better, do this differently, or you're not handling this well kind of experience. And I just feel like, oh, that's not very fair.
Right.
And I think there needs to be some acknowledgement of how people are supposed to be processing all this information we are bombarded with, but that the messaging is not clear, and it's also not consistent, and it's also not congruent. So the experience of saying like, okay, so they're saying this and they're saying that, and how do I, you know, it's like a full-time job really trying to figure out the facts somewhere in there.
Right.
And during a really scary time, right? And so that feels like, you know, there are parts about social media that feel like, you know, you should really kind of limit your time around how much you consume and how often you can consume it, because it really affects your mind state, right? So if you already recognize that, okay, I have some jittery feeling and I'm not settled here, and it feels like I'm already activated, and then I turn on the news and now I'm like, okay, I'm 10 on the scale.
Right.
Then it's like, okay, let's close the news. Maybe we listen to some nice music, or maybe we just listen to nothing,
Right.
and try to find a bit of more balance that way. For some people, they have to say, I can't watch the news,
Right.
you know, and for some people I need to watch all the news all the time, all the channels.
Right.
And then I'm like, okay, how's that going for you?
Yeah.
Right? Because that feels like a lot.
Right.
So I do think, like, you know, we have a right to be informed. We have a right for transparent information. We have a right to access to information, particularly when we're making decisions about our bodies and our healthcare. But in saying that, it's also figuring out what is the right balance for me, and everybody has to listen to their own self around what's enough and appropriate amount of information, and from which source, and also figuring out what is appropriate to tell your child depending on their age and stage of being able to understand and process, right? Because I think that's a lot of what happens too. The kids are kind of getting flooded with information. So it's figuring out what is the appropriate balance in watching who's watching what media too, with your children, right? I think is important.
For sure. And both of you stated that you're finding that some of the youth that you're seeing, they're okay, but then they're saying they're worried about their parents. So I guess the question now comes to us as parents. I understand that obviously how we behave, how we react is sort of, they react off of that. What is it that maybe parents can do, I guess, to make them recognize that, oh, how I'm behaving is affecting my kid this way because of whatever. Like, what is it that we need to look for in ourselves to be able to do that?
Mhm. So that's a great question. And sometimes, you know, it comes down to the fact that whether it be a young person or even an older person that have these difficult relationships with people in their lives, I'm usually like, well, you're the one that's here. So we can only work with, you know, trying to figure out how best you can live in this situation, if that's what, you know, you have to do or choose to do. But in terms of parents, sometimes it's like developing their own ability to understand that, as you say, what I do, what I experience impacts my child, and how might that look? So if I am working into the night, into midnight, and I'm waking up and I'm snappy and things like that, then how would that not affect the person you're living with, right? So it is sometimes just taking a step back, gaining perspective, taking a day off. If you have to take a day off, if you get to, taking sick days, things like that, really checking in with your child, right? So also not to assume like, yes, my child is thriving, because they may seem like they're thriving, but really like checking in, asking questions. You know, children, teenagers, it's hard to engage around what is actually happening right now. So hey, you know, how was school today? It was good. Okay. So what happened? Like, did your friends say or do anything? She's like, no. So like, there's sometimes it's like figuring out some open-ended questions, lots of open-ended questions. You know, just talking over dinner, things like that, really trying to connect, right? So I find too that parents can be, I'm a parent, so I can say this about myself too. Like we can get like very like alarmed by things that we hear. So it's approaching it without that like alarm, because then they're going to shut down and be like, I can't tell you anything because you're going to freak out. So really like checking in with your own nervous system, be like, okay, let me just check and see what's happening right now. What am I reacting to? Is this like triggering something in me from my teenage years? Like really like taking the time to work through that and not putting it on our child, right? To sort it out ourselves and not put it on them all the time.
For sure. So it really is about like our own self-reflection kind of, and understanding our emotions mentally and just emotionally and everything.
And also, sorry, just also that because you just said something that like made me think about this too, is like really like learning about the teenage brain, right? Because we forget what we were like as teenagers. It's a hard time. And the teenage brain is not fully adult. So this expectation that they should have their emotions in check, they should be able to do all their chores without being reminded 100 times. Like you got to remember, like their brains are not fully developed. So they think that in some ways that they have an adult way of seeing things, yet they don't know that the system is not fully formed, right? So it's also as adults, as parents, recognizing that like, oh yeah, they're only 13, 14. They're not 30. Exactly. They're not 35. They don't understand this yet. Yeah,
exactly. And even just to piggyback on that, even for some parents who are not able to transition from when they're young to into teenage, they still treat them like teenage, which also shuts down the kid from wanting to talk to you, because it's
absolutely
like, I'm not, mom, like stop, right? So you still also have that piece, right?
Yeah.
So I know that also in the media they've stated that domestic violence has gone up during this time also. And I know that sometimes it is difficult for some of these women to leave situations because of, you know, where do they go, right? How can they leave when their partner's there all the time, 24/7 and things like that? And I know that there is a few social media posts where I've noticed that they're now creating something where there's signs, or like, give me an example, like tell me in codes that, you know, something is going on. But what would you, I don't know if you guys have had any clients that is going through it during this time, but, or worked with even before pandemic, but like, what are some of the things that we can maybe help or tell some of our listeners that might be going through a situation with domestic, and, you know, trying to help them through this, coping, and even how they can help their kids through it too? Like, is there anything that you would say or recommend?
Yeah.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah,
okay.
I'll let you go.
Yeah, so I predominantly work with women, and for sure during the pandemic, things have definitely increased, unfortunately. I mean, I guess I kind of saw that coming, because anytime there's like a state of isolation for whatever reason, things get harder and more risky and dangerous. And so women feel the effects of that, as do their children. And so, you know, part of what we talk about in plan is like, what are the safest ways for you to get access, like, or a window into external information that's not just funneled through him. So for an example, some of the women I work with had no idea that the lockdown had been lifted at moments where it was, like, let's say in the city, I live in Toronto. Right. And so, you know, they were like, well, I can't go out because nothing's open. And I'm like, yeah, things are open. The lockdown was lifted a month ago. Wow. And so it's just like, oh, well, I haven't been able to talk to anyone or look at the TV. Like, I can't go, and I'm not allowed to go on the TV or have my phone or anything. So I had no idea. And he just kept saying that we can't go out. So we've all been like locked in. And so just even figuring out little slivers of like, how can you link with somebody on the outside like a support person or a family member or a friend or a trusted companion who can just give you the facts about what's happening and how to access more care and support should you need it, or should you be ready to or want to make a change, like a more permanent change, like leave, even get a respite to go somewhere else.
Sure.
Or if you need to get a word out that things have become just so incredibly dangerous for yourself and the children and that you can't stay, or you're injured or whatever the case, right? So I think it's figuring out like just how to care for yourself on a daily basis and try to keep up with your needs as best you can, but also figuring out like how can you get some information from outside of what he's sharing with you or they're sharing with you so that you can have a bit of a sense of what's happening in the world. And I think that we're seeing it more now. I mean, there's like intimate partner violence, like the things are on the rise, but I think we have a heightened awareness of it now. I don't think the stats are really accurate, because I think we just know about it more now because kids are separated from school in a way that they never have been before, and so there's different windows into people's lives that we haven't had before.
True.
And so we're learning about it differently. It's not that it's so new, or that it's like this huge increase. I think it's been what it is. I think that we just have a new awareness of it. It's like racism is not new. We just have lots of video footage now.
Right.
So it's the same. I had the same kind of feeling where I'm like, yeah, these are not really new things. It's just like the isolation of the pandemic gives more power to someone who is trying to create an isolated scenario. So now I know you can't see your friends, and I know you can't see your parents, and I know you can't go outside. I'm going to tell you you can't go outside.
Right.
And also women getting misinformation about what to do with their health or what they have access to or how dangerous it is to go outside, and all this kind of stuff, right? And that's how the risks get increased.
For sure. For sure.
Even I just earlier today was seeing on Twitter, because unfortunately there was an awful incident of violence on Wednesday where a woman was murdered by her husband.
In Canada? Huh?
Yeah.
I didn't hear about it.
And what I saw was that apparently there are partners, abusive partners, that are telling their partners shelters are not safe because of the pandemic. So one of the feeds or a post I did see was a shelter saying that is absolutely not true. This is how we're keeping people safe in shelters. So even that piece of information, kind of similar to what Lindsay's saying, is that limit of access to knowing what is happening and having someone tell you, oh, it's a pandemic, so you can't escape, you can't go anywhere, is absolutely not true, right? So just knowing that you can share that with a client or something, saying, hey, by the way, if you need to go, it's a pandemic, but shelters have their own standards and are doing what they can do to keep people safe as well.
For sure.
Yeah. And can I add, Susie?
Yeah, go on.
I also feel like, there's a situation now, there's like a weaponizing of the children, and which is not new, but the dynamics around the pandemic is such that, well, if you take the kids anywhere, then you're giving them COVID, and, you're going to kill our kids. So there's this like new layer on top of mom, that it's like, not only can I not choose my safety, but by choosing my safety, I'm in fact directly putting my children at risk. And so, I need to stay here to protect my children. So I think Michelle's right, like really trying to challenge that narrative is important, because if moms are not safe, either are our kids, right? So it's really getting a different narrative out there about what is safe and how we are protecting women and their children.
No, it's true. And I think this sort of ties into what you guys already said, because I know that at times as moms, we will tend to put our emotional and our mental health well-being aside to ensure that our children are doing well and doing better. But I think you guys have already answered it throughout by saying we as moms needs to be aware of our own needs. We have to be aware of our own like our emotions, and why do we, like as you said, Michelle, like ask yourself, like, why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling like I might be over exaggerating a situation where it doesn't have to be like that, right? Is there any other things that we need to, as parents, be sort of mindful of when it comes to our mental health, because I feel that because we've always been on the go, we never had time. And
Mhm.
as Lindsay said, like now we're in a period of stillness that we don't even know what, like we get uncomfortable, which is where that anxiety comes into play, right? And it's, when we're having all these lockdowns up, school then close, and it's like, how do I plan even life in general? But then at the same time, it's like they need to make sure that they're doing their work. They need to make sure their money's coming in, bills are being paid, there's enough food in the house because kids are here 24/7 eating now, and all of these things, and trying to at least spend time with their kids. But it's like, I can't spend time because I'm not, like, all those things are happening. Like, what are some things that
Mhm.
can maybe help some of the listeners to figure out, like, other than the stuff that you already mentioned, is there anything else?
Mhm. I definitely see this amongst some of my Black clients, is this like stoicism where it's like, I can't ask for help.
Mhm,
I am not able to ask for help because I don't want to feel like a burden.
mhm,
I don't want to seem like I am needy, things like that. So for me, it's around like even unpacking, okay, what is this about? And who in your life can actually be supportive to you, that is not going to judge you, like hold you to this expectation, like, well, if I'm helping you now, then you must do XYZ for me tomorrow, whatever. And sometimes people don't have those people in their lives, but it's almost like, even if that person is me, that could be okay, like email me and tell me what it is you need. Oh, you need a like a food gift card? Okay, let me see how I can get that for you.
right.
um because some people are telling me that like it's about choosing to feed themselves or to feed their kids,
Yeah.
yet they're showing up for counseling. So it's like, okay, so like, let's figure this out then, because that's also the reason why I'm here, so we can sort these things out. It's not just about a venting session about the system. It's about, okay, so let's figure out, the system sucks. So
Mhm.
let's figure out ways to best support you during the system so you can feel that you have a bit more energy and sustenance or something to support your family and children.
For
So
sure.
it's like that I see is a bit of a challenge, like this inability to say, I actually need this. So
Right.
even clients that like, I had clients that were like, no, I'm paying you full price. So I'm like, you don't need to pay me full price. Pay me what you can. And then I get a e-transfer, it's full price.
Right.
So I'm like, wait a second here. So let's talk about shame and pride,
Yes.
because is that helping you in this situation?
Yes.
So
Yes.
sometimes it's been helpful to have that discussion, and then they're able to see like, look, you know what, I need to come more often, or I need to do XYZ. Yeah, okay, I can only afford to pay this right now. Okay, great. And in this time, we'll figure out other resources for you as well, right? So
Right.
so
Right.
it's like really like working with that, like the shame, the, again, like I said, the stoicism, like I need to be strong Black woman. I'm told I'm a strong Black woman, so therefore I must always appear that way to everybody. But it's like, that's really breaking you down, isn't it? So let's work with that and figure out some other things.
Right. Is
Mhm.
there anything you want to add, Lindsay?
I was just thinking about the women I work with that have child welfare involved in their intervening in their lives, and or other people that have lots to say about their parenting. And I was just thinking, like, the expectations that people can project onto can be so much more injurious than we might even realize in the moment. And the expectations that then we internalize and put on ourselves can be also as weighted, if not more.
Right.
So, just thinking about, like, I would never expect this from my child, to be balancing all these, juggling all these balls, or any other loved one or woman or mother or anyone else, expected to be able to juggle all this. So I think, like, it's also kind of assessing, like, what is fair to expect of yourself right now, when
Mm,
there's so much that's unknown, when there's so much that's uncertain, when there's so much grief, when you're responding, you're trying to respond to yourself, respond to the needs of the people you're caregiving for,
mm,
be responsive in community, you're doing all this extra emotional labor, like, there's so much. So I also think taking a step back and just seeing for myself, like, you know, and that can ebb and flow, right? Like maybe this week my tank is a little bit empty, so I'm going to step back and say to my friends, like, you know what, I'm not able to give, I can receive in this moment.
Right.
That's what I need some nurturing.
Right.
And I think it's also coming into this place of like being able to ask for what I need, and that we have a right to have our needs met, whether it's from your therapist or your friend or your family member or whomever. It's just saying like, hey, you know what, I'm exhausted, I actually can't make a meal. Is it possible for someone who is cooking to cook doubles and drop some by me? You know, that this is like a loving thing that I think a lot of people also have that energy that they want to help, but they don't know how to do that. And so, you know, and that, like Michelle's talking, like that pride that sometimes it's like, I have to do this because I'm scared of what will happen if I say I can't. And that is a very legitimate fear for lots of people, that there is risk there. I don't want to pretend there's not, but I also want to just say that, you know, we deserve to have the support that is needed to care for ourselves and for the other beings that we take care of, you know. And if that means meals and diapers and wipes and whatever else is happening, it's important to get access to that and ask for what you need, because this is not a time for judgment, and this is a time to be realistic about expectations.
For sure. I completely agree with you guys on that. And that is, I think, one of the biggest, and it's, I mean, it can happen in all cultures, but I mean, me being Black and growing up, that was one thing that it's so hard. You're not supposed to really ask for help. You need to try to figure it on your own. And it's funny that, Michelle, you mentioned the strong Black woman, because I was going to mention it, because I've noticed that it's becoming this whole big thing now with, stop calling me a strong Black woman, because when you're called a strong Black woman, it's like different expectations than if you were just called, I'm a Black woman. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like you have to uphold these things, and it's like nothing, you're good. Even when you're down inside, you know, don't ask for that help, because you're good. You're holding up, you're helping other people. Meanwhile, you're like struggling deep inside, but because you have to put up this facade, because everyone's looking at you as this strong Black woman, and it's just like, but then what about me? And then you start to get depleted. And then what happens at that point? And then it's like, I can't ask for help though, because remember, I'm seen as that strong Black woman, gotta uphold it, you know? And as I said, I know it's in all cultures where there's a lot of these expectations, and where, you know, sometimes we don't like to ask for help, and, you know, we don't want to look like a charity case, or, you know, try figure it out on your own, you know, you can do it, don't worry, you know, but it's like, but where do I start? And that's the other problem. People don't know where to start. Right? How do I start? And especially in a pandemic, when a lot of things are closed down, and where do I go for help? I don't know if I can, like, some places don't even may not offer virtual. Some families may not even have internet services to be able to do virtual, or maybe their phones are on minutes or something. Like, you know, there's so many limitations, but then at the end of the day, it's like, you know what, it's probably better if I just sit here and just suffer by myself with my kids, and we'll figure it out on our own, you know?
Right.
So it's, I mean, yeah, I agree with what you guys are definitely saying. It's really hard out there. And I mean, we do have to learn to be able to let go of the pride. But yeah, it's a lot of work. And it's, as you guys said, it's a lot through a lot of, it's a process, and it's a healing that we have to go through to be able to do that, right? I want to ask you, when it comes to mental health, do you feel that there's a difference? And I don't know if there is, but mental health versus with a chemical imbalance, or versus mental health due to traumatic events in the past, whatever it is, or what you've gone through. Do you find that a lot of the times from your clients that the what they're going through when they're coming to you, it's usually basically traumatic events that they've gone through, that they've repressed and hasn't dealt with, and now because we're in this stillness, certain things might be triggering us, certain things might be bringing things up for us that now we're like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? Versus, is it just a chemical imbalance? And, you know, they always talk about those things. Like, what would you say?
Well, I'd say that we definitely know a lot more now about trauma and intergenerational trauma, how trauma is passed down. I think, like I mentioned before, like sometimes that's the conversation where even having that information for clients, it's like life changing. It's eye opening. It's like, oh, I can understand now why my parents might have treated me this way or acted these ways, because they were traumatized. And then now that trauma is passed down to me. So sometimes, yes, actually, a lot of my clients have experienced past history of trauma, and not necessarily one event, but a series of events over time, over years, since they were born, like birth injuries, all sorts of things like that.
Okay.
And I do have clients that identifies as having perhaps like a diagnosis where they definitely require medication. And for those clients too, I do find it really interesting is like when they come to that acceptance and that realization, it's like they would never miss a day of meds. They are upset if a friend misses a day of meds, like really supportive of those friends that also require maybe medications to like function well in the day. So they're really become really good or strong advocates for perhaps the need for taking medication, because they realize, well, if I don't take these meds, then I won't be able to keep my job, which I really like and I really enjoy, and all those things.
Right.
And having said all that, sometimes people can recognize it both, right? Like they do have maybe something like a chemical that was genetically passed down. They could say, yeah, I noticed this behavior and my uncle or my dad had this too. And I've experienced a lot of trauma in my life. So it can be also both. So it's, again, a lot of psychoeducation, a lot of understanding like what it is they need to function as best as they can in their daily lives. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you want to add anything, Lindsay? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think Michelle answered so beautifully, but I was thinking about this, the suffering that happens in silence, and just that no matter what the difficulty is or the root of it or what's fueling it, when silence is around and isolation is around, the suffering can be so big and so loud and so unbearable.
Yeah.
That like much of what I try to do is like connect people, because I think that like even if we can't, fix this immediate issue that's happening for you, just even talking with another person that's like, I'm also struggling in this way, and this is like this is what I feel like I'm up against, and this is how I'm responding to it.
Yes.
Helps. It helps just even to hear that.
Right.
And so I think like no matter what's happening or what fueled that to be happening for you, I think just trying to minimize some of the silence and isolation around that helps so deeply. And I do believe in like collective healing too, right? And just kind of coming together to have that conversation together, it makes a big difference.
For sure.
So Lindsay just touched on something very important. And I think one of the things in terms of going into private practice that was really important for me was that ability to do groups for that collective healing work that Lindsay is speaking to. So that is not the only, like individual sessions are not the only way people can get support, right? Like so much is learned when people can share together in a similar space and have maybe similar experiences, maybe different experiences, but that learning and that healing can be done and can be done online as well, which again, for people that may not live in the same area, like it's bringing people together in that way.
For sure.
So that was actually something that was quite important for me to have those options for people as well. And I could say that like, I'm actually running a mindfulness meditation support group for a community health center. And that like the weeks together is so beautiful. It's so healing. And the women always say like, so grateful for this time, for the space. And there was an apprehension of doing it online, but so like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how nice it would be to connect. And even though we're not together, I could feel your energy, all that stuff, right? So that is so healing and so important to connect people, as Lindsay's saying, for people to be able to share those experiences. Say, well, this is what I'm doing. This is what's helpful. I've had people in those groups like offer support to people like online, like, oh, do you want me to meet you here? I can help you. I'm like, wow, like this is amazing. Like that community led support. Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm actually doing a project right now. The goal is to like talk with women about how things have gotten more difficult through COVID. And even just the one-on-one conversations I'm having with them, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel just even relief from this conversation and being able to like, not just talk about what's been really hard, but what am I doing to face the stuff I'm up against, and just to brainstorm with you and say out loud, like, actually, I am doing a lot to take care of myself and my family. Like, I am kind of coming out of this feeling strong. Like, I am feeling like it's not just happening to me. I'm a part of this experience, and I am fighting for my health. I'm fighting for the health of my family. And like Michelle's saying, like, just connecting all of the women together, it's just so powerful.
For sure. And then, and not only that, but doing it as a group, it also helps to normalize what they're going through. Because, you know, a lot of times, sometimes women and even men feel like they're the only ones that's going through this, right? There's nobody else that can, because we always feel like our problem is the biggest and there's nobody other problem. Like, there's nobody that has a bigger problem than ours. Like, don't realize that, you know, actually there's somebody that is in a worse situation than you are, but just being able to normalize that for them, it does help them to be able to be like, all right, I think I got this, right? So that collective hand, that healing, it really, the healing piece together, it really, I can see that being beneficial for people at times, right? Yeah. And it's funny, I just said something and I should ask you, do you guys find that you're getting a lot of men? Because, you know, we know men sometimes don't feel that they don't cope with, they feel like they don't really go through it. Plus, there's also that stigma about men don't show emotions, right? And of course, depending on your culture, there's no such thing as mental health. Do you find that do you find quite a few men coming and looking for help in your practice?
Yeah, I do have some men in my practice, or some that have gone through, like have done a number of sessions, or like, yeah, I'm good now. But for the most part, some of the Black men I've worked with, very interesting, because yes, like they've experienced so much trauma and no outlet to ever discuss these things, right? Because again, like they either had to like suck it up, be strong as well, support their kids in a way, work all the time. It's been actually really lovely to work with some of my male clients who never had this type of outlet to just say what they were feeling, even in terms of things like relationship challenges, if they're with their partners. So things that they are trying to learn in order. There's like, I'm just thinking about a comment. One of the men says, like, women love men that go to therapy, right? So even if that's your motivation, hey, great, right? But
yeah.
At the end of the day, they're trying to be a better version of themselves, as they say, right? So yeah, I do have some men, different men from different cultural backgrounds. And so even being able to discuss, like, well, this is the culture it came from, and this is how it's impacted me as this person of color in this society, has been really like healing and helpful. Sure. And also, I would say too, like this is like for all people, including men, but sometimes when they've shared like where they are from, and they might share an article or something, I was like, okay, like I got a history, like I understand a little bit about like what it means to come from this place in Africa, or this place in India, or something like that. I find it's like, yeah, it's been really really lovely experience, actually.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm seeing more couples now. I don't know if you find that, Michelle, but I'm also, I think the pandemic has been challenging for folks that are at home together in relationship and different dynamics, but for sure couples have had challenging moments, and leaning on your partner more than you might have in the past, because you're not seeing your friends in the same way, or maybe not connecting in the same way. So now your partner is taking up the role of your partner and your friend and your auntie and your cousin or whomever, right? So it just ends up like really taxing on the relationship. And so I think really also seeing it that way, like, okay, this relationship is up against a lot right now. There's a lot of pressure, and men feeling like, I want to hold on to this relationship. I want to get back to where we were, or to a healthier place. Like, how can we continue to have patience with each other and like communicate with love and respect, and come out of this with more awareness, like for our like self-awareness, but also relationship awareness and relational awareness. Like, what are our patterns in our relationship that are really great, and what are the ones that maybe are not really serving us right now? And so that's been really nice to see.
For sure. And you know, it's funny because you do wonder about the couples, right? Because the only time I was seeing you was like maybe in the morning for breakfast. I didn't see you again till dinner time. And then, you know, I was busy with the kids at that point. And by the time I saw you, was in bed and we're both knocked out. And you know what I mean? So to be like 24/7, and it's like, oh, dude, you're in my space. Oh my gosh. It's like, oh, I can't. So to know that there are actual
Yes.
couples that are really seeking out, that's really good to hear,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes you feel that they may feel like, no, I don't need your help. How are you going to sit here and tell me how my relationship is supposed to be, right? So
Yeah.
that's good that more men is coming out, whether it's in a
Yeah.
relationship or by themselves, because I do feel, I'll be honest, I do feel sorry for a lot of men because I feel that they're not able to have that space, as you guys say, because yeah, you're right. We do look at you as like, suck it up, princess, like deal with it. You're a man, like what's wrong with you, right? But that there we go again, that whole stereotype and placing expectations on you as on your role. We shouldn't be doing that, right? And that's the unfortunate piece about the society that we live in. So one of the last questions I wanted to ask you, what are some I guess coping strategies or mechanisms, I know we talked a little bit here and there about it, but like what are some coping strategies or mechanisms that people can use that might be going through depression, or who may be afraid to seek help, right? They're not there yet to get the help that they need. They want to try to deal with it on their own. What are some things that we can tell like our listeners that might be going through that moment right now, whether it's depression, anxiety, because I know anxiety is a really big one. You know, what could we tell them?
Yeah. For people who I'm seeing that are maybe, kind of struggling with depression, we might talk a lot about trying to build in some kind of routine. And that routine does not need to look like super rigid. And I think people get stuck with that. It's like, oh my gosh, I messed up my routine. I'm screwed up. Like all these like negative narratives come in. It's like, okay, like let's make a routine that works for you, for one. Like I can't tell you what to do. I don't know how you can spend your days, but sometimes routine is helpful just in terms of momentum, right? So if I know I'm going to wake up at 10 and then I might make a coffee or tea, like something nice, I can start off slow and maybe add one or two things into the day. I think what people do is that they have this big expectation, like, but I need to be doing all of these things. So I'm always like, let's break it down into smaller parts so it doesn't seem like a big overwhelming situation. So whether that be like depression, anxiety, or both, it's like, let's break it down. Do you need to do all that stuff today? Okay, can you just fall apart today? Is that okay? Can you just stay in bed today and not be mad at yourself for staying in bed? So it's like you're choosing, like it's a choice. Well, I'm going to choose to stay in bed and I will not beat myself up for doing that. So like once it's like I'm staying in bed, like I'm so mad at myself, I just stayed in bed. It's like, can you choose to do one and be okay with that?
Yes.
So sometimes just like very simple things, right? And the thing that strikes me is like, if I ask a person, okay, so like, how's your week? Like, what did you do? I didn't do anything. Then we talk for like the next 50 minutes and they're like, well, I wrote a screenplay and I baked this from, I'm like, wait, how did you say that you did nothing? And then you just told me like 10 things you did in a week. I'm like, can we start valuing the things that we do daily, even if it's 1-2 things that you think are small? Can you try to place value on that so you don't come away thinking you don't do anything?
Yes.
It doesn't match up a lot of the time. Like, wait, what do you mean you didn't do anything? Like, you made me think that you literally did nothing.
Right, exactly.
You got up, you took a shower. Oh, okay. You checked your emails. Oh, you booked an appointment. Oh, you did something. Great.
Right.
So it's really like trying to get them to value the things they do and not put themselves down for the things they claim to not be doing, right? Sometimes it's a challenge that's like, really? Okay.
Yeah, and I agree. It is actually a challenge to be able to put value on what we do.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes even the most littlest things that we may do, we feel like, oh, that wasn't even anything big. Like, who cares? So then that's why we're like, yeah, I did nothing.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, what'd you do on the weekend? I did nothing. And then meanwhile, I know, like, actually, no, I actually did this and I did this and I did this. So you're right. Like, we don't know how to do that because before COVID, that's what we're doing. We're just going. That was just life. Right?
Yeah.
So now it's like, now you're right. We have to be able to do that. And I think the other hard thing, and you mentioned it, is for people to do nothing. Nobody knows how to do nothing. Like,
and be okay with it.
Nothing. Yeah, it's hard.
Yes.
Because people are like, yeah, but I got like, even if they're trying in their head, they're like, yeah, but you got dinner that you got to do. You got your kid that you got to like help with homework, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, maybe it's not right. I shouldn't do this. And I think that's the hard part. Is being able to accept things
Yeah.
and being able to be okay. And I think that's
Yes.
for a lot of us, no matter where we are in life, no matter what status we are, color, whatever, gender, whatever. The point is,
Mhm.
we need to be okay with these things. And as you said,
Mhm.
put value on what we do. Because it's, first of all, we have to be grateful that we're just even being alive as it is every day. But just being able to put value on things, it's so big, but it's hard.
Mhm. It's hard. Yeah.
It is
Mhm.
hard. It's hard. Did you want to add anything to it?
I was just thinking about, like, we're really, if we just poured compassion on our entire situation, and like everybody that's around us and around ourselves every day, like if you just think up and you wake up and you shower in compassion, it's like, we are experiencing something we've not experienced before.
Yes.
And just because I've been raised up in this very capitalist, individualistic world, where it's like the expectation is this like turnover of production.
Yes.
And so the pressure, like you said, Susie, even being home and you're working even harder than you were in the office, right? It's like, let's be mindful of the effects of that programming, like that indoctrination where we've been told you need to keep doing,
Right.
and that somehow we're not having the same worthiness or value if we're not producing or providing like outcomes. It's
Yes.
like, when did we start thinking about ourselves in that way?
Exactly.
Mhm.
You being the beautiful creature just that you are, is enough.
Yes.
You don't have to make anything, you don't have to produce anything, you don't have to, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, those are the parts of ourselves that I think, we can turn down the volume on that and turn up the volume on compassion, and just say,
Sure.
okay, you know what, you're having an experience you've never had before, plus you don't even have your regular supports to
Yeah.
go through this
That too.
experience. And so everything gets compromised, like Michelle's saying, like the structure can be helpful, because I mean, I think we've all gone through moments where it's like, okay, now I'm sleeping at whatever time in the day, or
Yeah.
I'm not sleeping well in the night, or my food, my digestion is thrown off because my food is, I ate late or whatever, right? So it's like coming back to the things like, some of the basics, like getting air every day, getting some type of movement, whatever's possible in your body, trying to have access to whatever food you can that will feed you, right? And that, all that stuff is also preventative in terms of keeping your immunity up and your health well,
Sure.
and your mind well, right? Having like time for you, being able to ease into the stillness and relaxation, and telling yourself like, this is good for me, this is building my immunity, this is making me stronger and healthier and clearer.
Yes.
And it's like, once I have a bit of that, I'm like, oh, what was I so upset about before?
Right.
Okay, this feels
Mhm.
way better. Let me
Exactly.
just put rose petals in my bath. Why
Right.
not? You know what I mean? It's like, why don't we deserve
Sure.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you do what you can with what you have, but it's also like, we can all come back to our breath. Let's just come back to our breath. Do some deep breathing. Do some, like trying to, if you were caring for someone and you were trying to soothe them and nurture them, what are the things that you would do?
Right.
And then say, I myself need that nurturing.
Yes.
I need that. I deserve that. I need that. It's sustaining, and it's going to help me through this really difficult thing that I've never gone through before.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For sure.
There's an article that I send to all of my new clients after the first session. And it has to do with, I'm probably not going to explain this very well, but as Lindsay's saying, like, we've never been through a pandemic. This is brand new. And we're not supposed to live like this. It's just, we're not supposed to be living like this.
Right.
So it talks about surge capacity, how as humans, we have this ability in a crisis to kind of like pool all of our resources together to cope with the crisis. But that crisis might be like a month or two. We've been in this thing for a year.
Exactly.
So when we have this expectation that we are supposed to have it together now, like I should be like back to normal by now. Like, why haven't I like adjusted? Why am I so tired? It's like, how about we give ourselves some grace
Right.
and understand like we have brains, right? Like, let's kind of externalize the fact that we have brains.
Right.
we forget that we have a brain that's allowing us to function and do these things, and that has to sometimes shut parts of ourselves down to cope.
Right.
So once people read this article, they're like, oh my God, I thought it was something wrong with me.
Mm.
Like the amount of times like I have forgotten things that I'm like, oh my gosh, if I don't write something down now, forget it. That wasn't my brain a year ago.
Right.
I could remember things without writing it down. It's like, I absolutely have to start putting in place things that I never did before in order for me to function well. So sometimes we're operating this way, like, I need to, my brain needs to work the way it did before. Therefore, I refuse to do all of these. That doesn't make sense though. Like, you're not supporting yourself by trying to do things that you cannot absolutely do now.
Yes.
That you maybe did a year before.
Right.
Yeah, our brains are not meant to function this way. So really, like, people need to really remember grace, as Lindsay said, like compassion, self-compassion, which again, like if you provide self-compassion to yourself, then you will have compassion for others too, right? So your expectations of others might also be like, okay, let me give them a break. Let me allow them to slow down today.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, which will ease like tension too, right? Because when you're able to depersonalize it and you see like, oh, that person's really struggling, then you know whatever energy you're getting from them, that might not be about you, honey. That's just that they're having a bad time, right? So it gives you a bit of a distance where you're like, okay. But I like what you're saying about the brain, Michelle. It's so important because, you know, the grief, the sea of grief that we are chronically swimming in. I mean, we know that grief affects our brain. We know that we actually change, our brain actually changes as a result of grief, right? So the shock and grief that we are experiencing for so many different reasons and ways, we have to also have the patience for our brain that is injured and now trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
Sure.
So it's also having that kindness to ourselves, right? Like, I'm actually not the same person right now. So why would I expect myself to do more or the same?
For sure. For sure. That's great. I love that. I like the way that, and that was a perfect ending right there, guys. Like, no, but because it's so true, because you're right. Like, I feel like as if now we are putting a little bit more expectations on ourselves, and we are not taking into account that, we're on this earth because we build by being in relationships with people, no matter what it looked like. We were meant to be in closeness with people. And because we're not going through it, as you said, Lindsay, we're going through a grief period of so many different things. And it's like, it's bad enough when you're trying to grieve when you lose a loved one, and especially during the pandemic, but now you're grieving like a loved one and everything else that,
oh my goodness,
gone. And it's, you're right. Like, how do I function? How do I figure it out? How do I cope? Like, how do I deal with it? So, I mean, you're right. We have to think about the brain piece of it and stuff like that. So, I mean, that was a great ending, as I said. But I do want to say thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I mean, I learned quite a few stuff, and I mean, I'll even be able to use some of these things in my practice with my I mean, I don't do counseling, but you know, I'm
sure you do in some ways with your groups, right?
You're right. I am. But I really appreciate you guys taking your time out of your day to, you know, join us and to educate us and to give us some information about mental health, how to cope with it now that we're in this pandemic, how it's changed and what it looks like now, and how can we help ourselves, right? And even it's okay to reach out and get help from somebody. Therapy is not negative. It's not something to feel like, oh, if I go in there, they're going to judge me. That's not what it's about. It's just another form of support, somebody outside of your circle that can actually help you to really delve into what's happening for you and to help you to get out of it, to be healthy. You know, your well-being is good, you're healthy, and you're feeling good within yourself. That's what it's about. So I will definitely put your how to connect with you in the bottom of our description, so that others that want to reach out and, you know, seek out services from you and things like that, they're able to do that. And I will also put on your social media and other forms of ways to connect with you. And I mean, you know, even if that article that you mentioned, Michelle, if you want, you can share that. I can, you know, have that link there. But I do want to thank you once again for both of you, Lindsay and Michelle, joining us and, you know, spreading your knowledge with us on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be with you girls.
Yes, it's so nice. I've enjoyed this very much. I love talking about mental health, and
well, you just for that, you guys know I will be calling you guys back again. Thanks for the
Anytime,
invitation.
darling.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.